Hello, hello, nerds, geeks, muggles. Welcome to another episode of Bam Splat Boom, where Abhijeet Kini and I talk about all things comics and pop culture. Now, we originally planned to record this episode after the season 3 finale of The Boys, but while we wait for it to actually end, we thought we would dive into another group of dysfunctional superheroes in the comic series Watchmen. So, Abhijit, why is Watchmen essential reading if you are going to get into comics and graphic novels?
Okay, I think first of all, it's a nice standalone graphic novel which doesn't have too much of a past, doesn't have anything which came after. Of course, there were a lot of other spin offs that came after the main Watchmen graphic novel ended. But it's a standalone story. It was a 12-part miniseries which became popular and it's different in many ways because I think Alan Moore gave us a look at a very human connection, a very human level of superheroes wherein everyone is normal, if I were to put it that way, and there's just this one godlike character which changes everything, not just socially, politically, but I think existential levels, maybe it makes a difference. So the conflicts are pretty much real. Everyone has a backstory. No one is outright good or bad. I think everyone is gray in this story. And the fact that, I mean, the writing is so complex, the writing is so layered. uh, every time I read the graphic novel, I find something new in it. Maybe something hidden in the details of the art, maybe something which is in the prose sections of the book, which people hate to read. Even I had not read it the first time ever that I had read Watchmen. I found it so tiring to go through the prose sections of each book. But I think when I finally read it, I was like, man, there are so many other stories in this which connects to the main graphic novel, the main panels. Such kind of layered, storytelling I haven't read before, and the fact that of course it has a lot of hype attached to it. I mean, it's counted as one of Time Magazine's top 100 novels ever. It's not just graphic novel; it goes into that territory. And the fact that it was supposed to be an unadaptable comic which cannot be made into a movie. There were so many starts and stops, but finally it got made in 2009. That's a different topic. I'm not going to I'm not going to praise the movie too much because I think that it deviates a lot from the main comic. But I think coming back to the comic, the art is it's beautifully complex. So is the writing, and the fact that the relations and the kind of character building each character has, I think that to me is very it's something very nice. It's something that I don't think any other graphic novel has come close to, which is why, for all the hype and for all the good stuff as well, from a personal point of view as well, wherein, if I have to learn something about how to develop a comic character and tell a story which is human, which is relatable to people, I think Watchmen is the example for me.
So, Abhijit, before we actually dive deep into the book, I thought let's give our listeners a quick idea as to what the Watchman is. Of course, a lot of people will know what Watchman is, but for those who don't know, here's a little background, which might help make sense of everything that we are discussing, further on. Watchmen was a 12-part comic series published by DC Comics in 1986 and 1987. It is written by Alan Moore, a genius, who's also written iconic works like V for Vendetta, Batman the Killing Joke, amongst many, many, many other books. It was drawn by Dave Gibbons and colored by John Higgins. Now, the edition that Abhijit and I will keep referring to is a collected edition of the 12 comics. Each comic has graphic panels as well as a prose section, which is fairly unique. The story is set in an alternate reality of the 1980s. The Hollywood actor Robert Redford is the US president in this story, but the Cold War with Russia is still on. The main characters in the story are a disbanded group of, I want to call them superheroes, but the accurate term would be masked vigilantes. Because none of these guys, save one, has any superpowers. Okay, and this guy is called, the guy with the superpowers is a godlike being called Dr. Manhattan. The story starts with one of the vigilantes getting murdered, and obviously there is a sinister plan afoot. And as I started reading this book, Abhijit, what stood out to me immediately was how this one didn't feel like a graphic novel. Okay, what do I mean by this? Typically, when you read a comic series, and it needn't be a childish comic series, we are talking about, let's say, Umbrella Academy, or you,
Right.
let's say, you talk Sandman. You tend to move fairly fast. What I have noticed is that you just tend to move from dialogue to dialogue to dialogue to dialogue without
Correct.
taking in the visuals completely. At least that's how a noob does it.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
I couldn't do this in Watchmen because there
Right.
was so much happening and there was so many details in the visuals. The writing is so complex,
Yeah.
not just the dialogues, but the narrative boxes
Yeah.
has such complex text attached to it.
Yeah.
That you have to slow down, you have to take
Yeah.
time to read through. And in fact, initially I bought a digital copy and I tried reading the digital copy on the laptop, and after about 5-6 pages I just gave up. I bought the book. You can't enjoy this. This is one
Yeah.
book which I don't think so you can enjoy on digital platforms. You have to.
That's true.
You need the book.
That's true. I think it's also got to do with the grid that they follow. It's a 9-panel grid. Pretty claustrophobic, actually speaking, because usually you have a 6 to 5, 6, 7-panel grids usually in comics, with some being wide panels, some being half-page panels. Here, there's rarely any. If you notice the book, you can just flip through it. All pages, almost 90% of the book is 9-panel grids. So it was pretty unheard of, and they're all uniform.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it a little difficult for you to kind of snap out of that grid layout and read comfortably. You can't. And like you just said, there's so much detail in the art, there's so much detail in the visuals. It completes a story which otherwise, if you miss it, you can't. Which is why I say, even now when I'm reading Watchmen again and again, there's always something new I pick up.
Yeah.
Maybe something in the background, maybe the expressions. There's a particular sequence in it you might have noticed where the comedian goes to Moloch at night. And he's telling him that he's seen something and he just can't. And there's a neon sign which is going on and off in the background. In the dark room, there's a neon sign outside which is going on and off. In that 9-panel grid, the way it has been shown, you can understand the time that is passing. You can understand the lighting in that room, and the fact that this dialogue is happening in a dimly lit. It's darkness, but there's a neon sign going on, going on and off. It's brilliant. I mean, these are the things which make for some fantastic. It's pretty much cinematic. If you ask me, the book itself is cinematic. It did not need a movie. But again, things like Watchmen need some sort of. I mean, it's waiting to be adapted, right? Although it is unadaptable, I think it needed a TV show more than a movie. So, which is why I think the TV show which came out a few years ago was brilliant in that sense, considering it's a continuation of the book in a very, very different direction, but equally, I mean, very effective as well. I think if they had done something like that, but back then streaming वगैरह कहाँ था? There was no. Yeah. If it was this time, if it was taken up at this time, I think it would have been made for a good TV series.
Can you unpack that a bit? What do you mean when you say that a graphic novel is cinematic? How would a visual artist look at it?
See, in movies, you get a good edit, right? Like wherein you have a good insert happening, where you have a good cut shot, something which probably is like a flashback, a quick flashback. You'll have a immediate cut. So the editing is what makes a movie so crisp and so good in narrative. I think when you do this in a graphic novel, in the way that they've done this in Watchmen, wherein for example, there is a sequence where Rorschach he's Walter Kovacs in his interrogation scene. He is being questioned on these Rorschach cards that are shown to him, and we are shown the inserts of what he is thinking of when he's seeing those blots. But he then replies something very, very innocent. There are two sequences there. One is when he actually says what he's seeing, and the other one he's actually coming up with something fake which sounds more innocent. So those inserts are very much like a cut shot that I would have seen in a movie. even the comedian and Moloch conversation that I mentioned, it feels like you're watching that play out live in front of you, including those neon signs. Because see, these are indicators of time, you know,
Hmm.
lights going on and off. How much time must have passed between each blink of light? We know the blink of light is going to be uniform. Like, if it's a neon sign which is going on and off, it will be a uniform whatever. So we then mentally compare the length of the dialogue with how much panels are black,
Ah.
how much panels are lit up. So in a way, it's kind of giving us the time which is passing. Is he saying this fast? Is he saying this slow? So somehow it adds to the pace of the story going forward. I think that is what is very effective. In fact, the very first page you see, it starts from a very tight panel of that smiley in the pool of blood,
Yeah.
and the camera keeps going up. That is so cinematic. That's like a good zoom out that's happening. And then you have the detective standing on the top floor saying, I don't know what the dialogue is, but it
That's
feels
quite
like
a
you're
drop.
watching a movie. Yeah, that's what it dropped. So it feels like it's a movie where the camera is going up, up, up from the scene of the crime. Also, I don't know if you've noticed, I don't know if you read about it. Each cover page
Hmm.
of each of the 12 series, 12 issues, is actually the first panel of the comic.
Yeah, I read about this.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, that also is kind of saying that when you're reading the entire thing at one go,
Hmm.
you're actually not looking at a cover page. You're actually looking at a panel of the story which is starting off from the cover itself.
Ah, okay, okay. I
So
read
in
about
many
it. I didn't
ways,
realize it
uh,
when I was reading
seeing,
it. Yeah, I read
yeah,
about it later. And talking about the prose part of it, right? And that too is that unique? Are there other graphic novels that follow this format, or is Watchmen unique in this respect?
I'm not sure if anyone else has done this before, or maybe something might have happened after Watchmen release.
Mm-hmm.
At least I hadn't come across anything where every book has a prose section. It's not like one issue had some prose you read done. Each and every issue of this 12 issue miniseries had a prose section, and it differs. One might be a letter, one might be a notice, one might be a book excerpt. It can be anything, and which is what they tried to do even in Doomsday Clock, which was the DC Comics follow up to Watchmen, wherein they merged the DC universe and the Watchmen universe in a, again, I think it was a 12-part series in itself.
Hmm.
They try to follow the same template, 9 panel grids and prose after each chapter. So I think it's a very Watchmen thing right now. I don't think there's any other graphic novel who's done this or pulled it off effectively.
The prose section is meant to offer the backstory. It almost feels like that. And
Yep.
also to go into the characters' minds, right? How
Yeah.
are they thinking? Like, and why are they acting the way they act? And I
Correct.
think it goes into it. And in fact, when you compare cinema to a book, and a graphic novel comes somewhere in between, right?
Yeah.
The way I would imagine the development of a graphic novel to go, it's dialogue driven, right?
Yep.
A graphic novel, you have to see what's happening. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
in a novel, a text novel,
Yeah.
you can go into, okay, what was I thinking while this was happening?
Mm-hmm.
You can jump into the character's mind, which
Yeah.
is not something you can do with a graphic novel or a film, because it's all about what you can see. And I think
What you are shown by the creators, what they want you to see. Yeah.
so. I used to write initially for print media. I would write articles. Then I
Right.
started writing for the visual medium. I started
Hmm.
writing for documentaries. And this was one of the lessons, that in a documentary, you have to let the visual talk. The visual is talking as well, and your words are supposed to complement
Yeah.
the visuals. Don't repeat what the visual is showing.
Absolutely.
You don't
Absolutely.
have to say the sun was setting, right? I mean, if because the
Yes.
audience can see the sun is setting.
Yes.
You then
Yes.
describe something
Yes.
else. And
Yes.
I would assume that a writer would face the same issues when it comes to a graphic novel. You have to follow what the visual is saying, and
Yeah.
and which is why it is all dialogue, 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 dialogue. Whereas in a novel, you can go into extempores, right? You can go into character descriptions.
True.
And the character
True. True.
descriptions will tell you a lot.
Correct.
So, for example, if you say he wore an overcoat as dark as night,
Yeah.
So you're creating an impression. Here,
Correct.
you can only show him wearing a overcoat, which is dark, but you can't say dark as night.
Correct.
You see, so yeah, so that prose section was beautiful in some sense because they figured out a way to bring the two,
Correct.
things together. And I think
Correct.
that makes for a lovely experience. I think I realized this while talking to you. It
Yeah, no.
didn't occur to me while I
Which
was
which
reading.
is which is the thing with Watchmen. There's every time there's something new, even when you're talking about it. I mean, it is so layered, and that's the word I keep using for this graphic novel. I have seen the there's an edition, like I was mentioning earlier. Watchmen has so many editions, like an international edition, a deluxe edition, it's got an absolute edition. So each one has some add-ons, right? They'll probably give you some drafts which the writers use. So if you look at Alan Moore's drafts, the script that he's written for each page, forget page, his page long descriptions used to be for one panel. He used to describe everything within that panel so much that I think Dave Gibbons might have gone crazy, adapting that script to a visual, which is why I think he put in so much depth, so much meaning into that script, the brief, that it had to be converted to a visual without words in it. And I think that is why each frame becomes a narrative, a tool which is so effective. So all this makes up for a very different type of storytelling, a very different type of making a graphic novel. I think that the technique used here is so different. Even the colors, by the way, the colorist, he never really gets too much of credit for what he has done there. But apparently that color palette that he used is supposed to make it look like a very uncomfortable watch. It's not the usual color palette that you see in any comic. It's not the same skin tones. It is not the same. It's contrasting colors actually. You will have a pink with a green. You will have some, you won't have complementary colors. So it's supposed to make the entire viewing very uncomfortable, very cringy at times, because I think that is the tone of the comic. And I think, and the build-up of that other island, the creature, there's so much suspense
I was going
going
to come
on.
to that.
Yeah. So, I mean, these many layers you don't get in many other comics.
In fact, now that we are talking about color, I just want to quote something, and maybe we can talk about this a bit. And I think in this, the Superman and all are in a comic format. I think in this world, the Superman, Batman, and all are comic heroes.
In comics,
and these guys are the superheroes, right?
Yeah, so, although I don't know if they've shown too much of Superman in the Watchmen comics, although they do mention that name Superman.
Yeah.
So now I don't know if they've used it as an adjective, or have they used it to reference Superman Clark Kent, because they are supposedly two different universes.
So this is the very first prose section, right? The prose section of the very first books. The atmosphere of the horrific and faintly sinister that hung around the Shadow, and the Shadow is one of the characters, was nowhere to be seen in the bright primary colors of Superman's world. And there was no hint of the repressed sex urge, which had sometimes been apparent in the pulps, to my discomfort and embarrassment. So they're referencing Superman, right, as a comic book character.
Correct.
Okay. Correct. And these guys are the ones who are now modeling themselves on these comic book characters. In the Watchmen world, the superheroes who have come, obviously they have no superpowers except for Dr. Manhattan, but they are modeling themselves on the superhero comics. And what he's referencing here is that the atmosphere of the horrific and faintly sinister that hung around the Shadow, who's one of the superheroes in the Watchmen world, was nowhere to be seen in the bright primary colors of Superman's world. Now, you talked about the color palette, and reading about this, it made sense that, when you read Superman, you don't feel this uncomfortable. Whereas Watchmen makes you feel uncomfortable, and I had no idea that colors could do this to you. And you see, even Superman's color, the costume color,
That's right.
the blue. It's the R&B of RGB, right? So
Yeah. Also, it is the American flag itself. No? They have a thing with blue and red. Everywhere you look at any of their pop culture icons, it's all the American flag. But here we have none of that. There's actually a Watchmen Noir edition which has come out, and it's a hardcover. The same Watchmen comic without color. It's a black and white edition, the entire graphic novel. People collect it because it's a different edition, but honestly, when I saw some of the YouTube videos reviewing it, it didn't have that discomfort because of the colors bring the in the minds of the reader, because it's black and white. So you won't have those garish contrasts, those neon lights, nothing. It's going to be flat black and white. So I think color definitely adds, and that is something that one would probably not look at consciously, but once you're made aware of it, I think it will strike you that these colors are not the ones you would see generally. The night skies are shown orange sometimes. Mars has pink sands, which is okay, but it's so not what you're used to seeing. And the blue, Dr. Manhattan's blue, they also reference how we can tone down that blue from that blue to light blue for TV. Remember that sequence? He's going to be on an interview and he's like, is this blue fine? So they are so self-aware of even the colors. And for some very strange reason, that pink and blue with black sky combination is, I think, very iconic to me when it comes to Watchmen. All those Mars sequences, pink and blue. And you're talking about a main character here on a different planet, but they're using a pink and blue here. Even the Earth sequences, everything, it's so different.
And it now makes sense why this was difficult to read for me. The stuff that you've talked about, the color palettes, because you don't feel like reading this. I mean, it makes you feel uncomfortable to go into the story. And I wonder, why would a writer want to do that, right? Why would you want?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Whatever moral ambiguity and other themes that you're discussing, I mean, why would you want the reader to feel like this?
It's Alan Moore. He's like a weird guy anyway. So I think that's number one. And number two is that he wants. I think the whole idea about these kind of gimmicks is that you want the reader to find it very different, relate with what the tone is, feel the tone of the entire story, the tension or whatever it might be. And I think that is what they were trying to do. But it's Alan Moore. He has probably given us some of the weirdest experiments in comics, the weirdest concepts that he has come up with, no matter which it is. Like the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I mean, to me, that's the most epic superhero team up. Characters that you definitely won't expect to be superheroes. But he's done that. So something like mood setting, something like stability, I think he's done a good job overall throughout the years. And I think Watchmen to him, I think must have been a very different type of an experiment. How to make them more uncomfortable. It's like Kurt Cobain, right? It's like Kurt Cobain saying that he did not like the mix of In Utero because he found it to be extremely well mixed. So he goes back to the recording studio. In fact, he sets up a studio at his home or wherever it was. And they record on like a digitape, and then they add more distortions, and they come up with this very, very grunge, very, very rough album. And he says, "This is what I want." So I think it's the same thing with these eccentric geniuses. They feel that no, I'm not going to come up with something which is widely accepted and widely used. I'm going to come up with something uncomfortable. Let's see what the audience reacts to it. I think that's the only the explanation I could give.
And maybe he wants us to feel the discomfort that we feel with ourselves,
Absolutely.
Right? The dark parts of ourselves. And by dark parts, I don't even mean the violent part of ourselves, which for example, Rorschach would represent.
Yes.
Our dark impulses. But, even the owl, right? He has dark impulses in the sense of, I want to give up. I'm not good enough. I mean, that's the dark part that he experiences, and I think there are these layers of darkness within each character, and I think that's perhaps the nature of the story.
Which is what they tried to explore more with the prequels, which is called Before Watchmen, which was so, I think, universally hated. I mean, no one was a fan of that series. I have them, I have collected them, and I enjoyed a few of them. Not that everything is bad. it was not required. But what they've done is they've gone into details of everyone's past.
Hmm.
Why have they acted like this? What might have happened to them? There are certain characters in the main Watchmen storyline where it's left to ambiguity again, saying that, oh, what happened to this particular character? There was that hooded justice
Hmm.
who in the main Watchmen comic suddenly disappears or something.
Yeah.
And they've played on that not just in Before Watchmen, they've played on that even in the TV series.
Yeah.
Brilliantly. I mean, that is something that you don't even realize as a main character in the main graphic novel. But look what they've done. They've taken that from there and taken it forward. But it's not Alan Moore approved. He hates everything that DC has done with his characters, with his movie adaptations, vagare, vagare. He has distanced himself from everything DC now, or it doesn't connect himself with any of his previous works. But I think the TV series was definitely a move in the right direction. So that's the thing, right? Every character has a motive. Why has he or she done this? That's all shown to us in Before Watchmen, although not everyone's going to like it.
Yeah, hooded justice is interesting because he's the first Watchman. Although they are not called the Watchman, right? And in fact, I want to use this to tie into one of the things that occurred to me. I can see the boys taking inspiration from the Watchmen. There is a sequence, and it's so funny. There is a superhero called Dollar Bill.
Yep. Yep. Who dies so tragically.
And it is so funny. He's employed as an in-house superhero by one of the major national banks.
Banks.
The bank feels having a superhero to protect money within the bank is an interesting publicity prospect.
Yes.
And he dies when his cloak gets stuck in the revolving door during a raid on the bank. He's shot at point blank range. I mean, what an awful way for a superhero to die. And I think there is so much packed in here. Okay, one, that superheroes, like, the reason why I reference the boys here is because a corporation wants a superhero to add to their publicity image. That is one. Second, they are making fun of cloaks. The cloak serves no purpose. It is a hazard. If you're a superhero, you don't want something.
Absolutely right. Absolutely, it's not functional. Which is what even Incredibles has teased, no? With Edna Mode saying no capes. It's always a fact. It's a liability. However, Dollar Bill, I'm going to come back to this character. Uske upar bhi they had come up with a Before Watchmen. There's a single issue storyline of Before Dollar Bill as well. If you read that, you feel even worse for that character. You feel for that character like, yaar, why? So it's the most unfortunate and funny deaths in the Watchmen storyline. But the way it happens and the way they build it up in Before Watchmen is actually quite a read. So you should try it out. So
the first generation is called the Minutemen, and the second generation is called the Watchmen. That's what
they are not called it, right? They're never referred to Watchmen. They're not called anything.
But they have this weird kind of storyline with Dr. Manhattan where his father is a watchmaker or a watch repairer.
Yes.
And they bring that in, right? And
yes, that to me kind of brings the entire iconography of clocks and watches in the entire storyline. If you notice all the promos and all, no, they'll continuously use the clock plus the Doomsday Clock. There's a Doomsday Clock, which is a big icon in the books as well. So I think they've used the clock very nicely. Plus, he goes back for the watch, right? In the room where he's bombarded with those particles.
And that's how he
becomes.
I also want to discuss the pirate story, right? The parallel storyline that's going on of a character who is reading. Okay, Janbujkar, I'm saying a character. We know who's reading the comic books, but so there is a character who's reading a comic book, and that comic book's story is intercut. And again, intercut is a very cinematic term.
Correct.
Is intercut with the main storyline. What's with that? I mean, why add this kind of random, piece of storyline in the middle of this? And why do that?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think that's a good question. I think the reason why he might have put it there is that probably he wants to show fact is never far away from fiction, because I think what's happening in the story is pretty much similar to what is happening in the real world, in the world of Watchmen. Somehow, there's always some connection somewhere. A person is reading that book, so probably they want to just add that little extra something. Like I said, Alan Moore, man, he can just make stuff happen. Also, the fact within the story itself, also the fact that you would notice that to make the intercuts happen, they even play around with those dotted textures on the colors, just like the halftones, because it is supposed to be a comic within a comic. The
Right.
Tales of the Black Freighter have halftone dots, whereas the rest of the Watchmen don't. The rest of the pages of Watchmen don't.
You're right. You're right.
So
And
another,
I can see the intercutting.
yes, the font changes, the parchment changes, the color tone changes, and the halftone dots come in. So I think that also is a very, so no one's going to get lost seeing that. Acha, this is what, where did this come from? They'll immediately know it's from the book, from the comic. So I don't know. I mean, it's there. So many layers. One of these being this. In fact, there's an animated shot of Tales of the Black Freighter which was out, I think in the extended edition or whichever Watchmen the movie, which has Gerard Butler voicing the Black Freighter.
I'm not sure whether it was required to be put, but well, who the hell am I to question Alan Moore? No, but I think it kind of depicts the descent into madness.
Yes, it does. It gets more and more disturbing as the story goes forward.
Yeah, and there are obviously people descending into madness in different ways in the
Yes.
story. And yeah, I mean, there is a bit of a spoiler here if we discuss it freely, because Rorschach is descending into madness in
Yes.
a different way, and Waite
Yes.
is descending into madness in his own way, right?
Correct. Correct.
Where
he's already a genius, whatever, but he is up to some nefarious deeds throughout. But turns out that he had a very good reason to do what he did. Although what Thanos did in Endgame, in Infinity War, and what he did in this story, to me, the motive was pretty much the same. To do good, but at what cost?
Endgame makes you feel good at the end of it because everyone comes back, and they don't really go into, okay, now that everyone's back, what the hell? Like now what do we do?
Yeah.
And I think they've tried to kind of address it in some of the TV series that have come out.
Yes.
Like, people coming back, and what does that mean? Because 5 years have passed. Whereas here, they don't give you any comfort. They don't.
No.
They don't. It's left because it's done. Like, the
it's done.
terrible deed is done.
There's no going back. Which is why the TV show connects to this very well. And one of my favorite characters on the TV show is Looking Glass.
Yeah.
He directly has a thing to do with that particular episode, which happens at the end of Watchmen, which is a squid monster.
Yeah.
So I think to me, that character stands out extremely well in the TV series. From taking off from what the book left you with.
Yeah. And sorry, I keep going back to Indian mythology because that's one thing that I am closely connected to, and I can't help but see at a very broad thematic level where you can't make up your mind about who's good and who's evil. And I think it shares that quality with Mahabharata, right? Where and one of the reasons why I think Mahabharata is such a great epic is because it delves into human character, and you'll find the so-called good guys doing great deeds, and same with the so-called bad guys who are also doing great deeds. So you can't make up your mind at the end of it. It's not very easy. For instance, so many storytelling guides and storytelling rules will say this, that you need to introduce the hero or the protagonist of the story, hero or heroine, in the very first pages of your story.
Okay.
And now we know that Watchmen, the first main character who is introduced is Rorschach. And yet I think Alan Moore doesn't think Rorschach is the character we should follow. He thinks he represents some of the worst elements of the society.
Yes. Yes.
And I think
Which is why a lot of people say my favorite character was Rorschach from this book. And it's actually a very disturbing thing because you can't have him as your favorite. It's pretty twisted what he is.
But if you were to pick Abhijit, now this will be an interesting exercise. Who do you think is the hero of the story?
I think it's Night Owl. I think it is Night Owl because again, he is, how do I put it? I mean, he is shown to be a lot more vulnerable of all of them. He has these insecurities. He has a past. So I think it has to be Night Owl, but he's never put in that zone. He's never shown to be the protagonist at all. It's definitely not Dr. Manhattan. It's definitely not Rorschach. Comedian, no way, because he's done so many bad things.
Yeah.
But that also shows, no, about what, again, connecting with boys. Even Homelander is a similar character, a patriotic, super whatever. I mean, being who's supposed to be the face of the American way, but he's up to no good. So who else is left? It's Night Owl and Silk Spectre.
Yeah.
And to me, it's Night Owl who's actually the protagonist, who the audience would relate to the most, because I think we understand what that character goes through at those particular times. He's given up on what he used to do. He's the second Night Owl. There's a legacy that he has tried to fulfill. Blah blah blah. So I think it's Night Owl to me. Not my favorite character, but I think he's the protagonist.
I agree with you. I agree that he is the most relatable character. He's the most human character, conflicted, struggling with with who is he, and there is that reference to his impotence.
Yes.
You feel the impotence that the Minutemen feel, the superheroes feel in this new world.
Correct. And imagine the fear that man has when he realizes that Dr. Manhattan he knows that he's committing adultery with his wife. Partner. Like if Dr. Manhattan, he's actually two-timing, with Silk Spectre, you're trying to mess with the wrong guy here. But it's a different thing that he doesn't care. So that fear is also shown. A couple of panels, he says something. I don't remember the dialogues, but he is scared.
Yeah. And then he goes
very
out.
Real.
And then he goes out and he carries out a mission. And after that mission is done, his impotence is cured, right? And he sleeps with Silk Spectre, right? Yeah, you're right. I mean, he seems to be the protagonist along with Silk Spectre, although if you see, they are by far the most powerless people overall in the scheme of things.
Correct.
But again, the story ends on them. Again, one of the way in which you can figure out who's the protagonist is, they usually have a romance of some kind, right? There is a relationship struggle in the whole thing.
Yeah. But even that is downplayed at the end.
Yeah.
It's not shown that this is the happy ending. It's just mentioned that they have now delivered a second life somewhere. And the fact that they both are the second versions of that particular character. Night Owl, the second, and Silk Spectre, the second.
And
so both have
amazing portrayal of Silk Spectre in the television series.
Oh yes,
like she's so
absolutely
good. She's so good.
Absolutely, I think she was pretty badass in the TV series.
Yeah,
she has switched over to this side.
Yeah,
from who she was. She lives with the father's name. She is a Blake now, and they have teased Night Owl. They've not shown Night Owl. They've told us what happened to him, but they've not shown him.
Yeah, and one would be tempted to call Dr. Manhattan the protagonist as well, the hero of the story as well. The reason, of course, is because of his powers, because he has powers that no one else has. He's the real superhero, right? He can do everything. But at the same time, he is sabotaged, and that shows that even the most powerful superhero would have his moments, where he has been deceived or whatever. And I love that sequence on Mars that he has.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone has described what it would be for somebody who experiences time all at once. What would that feel like?
Correct.
It is brilliant. It is brilliant.
Correct.
I was like, oh my God, yes, this is how a superhero would feel. If he were to experience time all at once, then what is the present? What is the past? Everything
doesn't matter.
And
In fact, Before Watchmen actually takes this into account as well. His particular story arc.
And the interesting thing, of course, then is, and this is sometimes I struggle with this, when I try to develop my own storylines and things like that, is that okay, you want to give your hero lots of positive qualities, you want to give them, you want to give him or her powers and things like that. I mean, in a fantastical story, in a science fiction and fantasy story, you would want to give your hero or heroine powers and strengths.
Correct.
Yet you also need to think about their vulnerabilities, because otherwise how is a villain going to attack you? Which is why there is a kryptonite to a Superman, right? Otherwise,
yeah, exactly.
And there is a kryptonite obviously for Dr. Manhattan, which Wade takes advantage of. So you see, it has that element to it. You have a guy with superpower, and then he's fooled, and then he comes back. Of course, afterwards, it's usually you would expect a superhero would be able to save the day, which he doesn't, of course.
He doesn't, because he just doesn't care. He doesn't care anymore. He does have a change in mind, but I don't think that has mattered. He just doesn't care. He just goes away in the end. Which also then, very smartly, the DC people have tried to connect with the DC universe now by saying that now he has created this current DC timeline. So there was this huge DC event called Rebirth, which was teased with this blue light coming from somewhere, and these guys are just racing towards it. It turns out it's a spoiler, I'm sure. but I mean, Doomsday Clock was another event in DC, and that was again like thing where DC universe meets the Watchmen universe. They cross over. So made for a good read, good collectibles as well, but not as, I mean, nothing close to the original.
But do you teach this in your class, Watchmen?
Yep. Watchmen is part of every subject I'm taking there. So it comes back each and every semester. It comes back. Right now I'm taking one called Comics and Cinema, in which I'm going to talk about Watchmen this week.
Achha.
In fact, next week.
Okay.
Tomorrow I have a class in the morning, which is I'm going to be talking about V for Vendetta.
Okay. But between V for Vendetta and Watchmen, which one do you think is more complex, or both are? Because even I've heard even V for Vendetta is very complex.
V for Vendetta is also very complicated. It's a direct political message out there, but I think more complex should be Watchmen. Although V for Vendetta is complicated, it's not as complex as this.
This goes into the human psyche, I feel.
I
feel that's what
V for Vendetta is difficult to read because the artwork is so dark. It's so complex. It's complicated to go through those frames. David Lloyd has just kind of gone crazy on the artwork. It's great, but it makes again for a very heavy watch, very heavy visuals. Whereas Watchmen is drawn out in a way that it's supposed to be that way in those grids, but at least the art comes across as like nice, something which makes visual storytelling happen the way you want to see it. V for Vendetta makes for a very complicated art structure. Just have a look at some pages later on Google.
Yeah, I mean, and I want to read this again at some point of time. Watchmen again. It was
do that.
Because the first time I just went through the story.
So when you got a chance, try it before Watchmen. Just going to expand on your Watchmen universe, understanding the characters. But I can tell you that Dr. Manhattan was really nice. It talks about the cat? The Schrodinger's cat, is it? What is it called?
Yeah, Schrodinger's cat. Yeah.
That paradox. Everything is talked about in that when it comes to reality. It's for a very good read. His Before Watchmen. Even the one for Minutemen was nice. The one which talks about Hooded Justice was pretty good. Yeah, but Silk Spectre was okay. Rorschach was so generic.
Rorschach, I don't know. Rorschach has been talked about quite a bit in this, right? I mean, I know there are events that they have not gone into, but Rorschach, they've broken down his psyche in this series.
Yeah. So Before Watchmen didn't make too much justice for Rorschach, but anyway, that's later. That's a lot of reading there. It's like a thick omnibus, but yeah, try it out sometime.